Step into Regency England, in a world of quiet longing, family duty, whispered scandal, and unexpected love. Every story offers another journey into romance. So settle in, dear listener, and let this Regency romance audiobook carry you into a time of elegance, emotion, and romance. The story begins now. Chapter 1. The Review. England, 1817. The candle had burned low by the time Cassandra Fenwick set down her pen, flexed her ink-stained fingers, and read back the sentence that had taken her the better part of an hour to sharpen. It was, she decided, exactly right. She had not been cruel. Every charge was supported, every example drawn from the text itself. There was nothing in it he could call unjust, which, in her experience, was far more damaging. The subject of her attention was a slim volume of verse by one Christopher Blackwood, late of the cavalry, now, by his own account, a poet. His was the third such collection to arrive on her desk in as many months. Another officer who had swapped his sword for a pen and assumed the exchange sufficient to produce literature. The fashion for it was relentless. Every young man who had seen a battlefield now believed himself entitled to sonnets, as though gunpowder were a substitute for craft. Cassandra dipped her pen, blotted it, and continued. She wrote in her small back parlour, at the narrow desk beneath the window where the morning light was best. That light was long gone now, and the room had dimmed to amber. A shawl hung from the back of her chair. A cup of tea sat untouched at her elbow, cold for hours. Around her were books, stacked, scattered, and arranged in one precarious tower that leaned against the wall like a drunkard. They had been borrowed, bought, and sent by publishers who did not know that the mind behind the anonymous reviews in the Lantern belonged to a woman of 26 with an ink smudge on her cuff. Her face was narrow and fine-boned, with dark eyes beneath arched brows that gave her the air of always weighing what she saw, as though she were composing a review of the person before her. Her hair was dark brown, nearly black in candlelight, pinned up simply with a single tortoiseshell comb that had been her mother's. She wore a dark blue wool dress, plain, neat, and unadorned, and if anyone had told her it became her, she would not have known what to do with the compliment. Her arrangement with the Lantern answered very well. She wrote incisive, anonymous reviews of the latest poetry and prose, and signed them Atticus, after the Roman patron of letters. It was a man's name, deliberately so, and it carried the weight she needed. Philippa Ashworth, who ran the magazine under her husband's name, had been the one to suggest it. Not as deception, she had said in her matter-of-fact way, but as necessity. A woman's critical opinion would be received as a curiosity, examined for evidence of feminine softness or spite, and ultimately set aside. A name assumed belonged to a man simply removed the obstacle. Cassandra had agreed without argument, yet agreement had not made the truth of it sting less. Her words were taken seriously because no one knew a woman had written them. She returned to the review.
Mr. Blackwood's verse arrives with the confidence of a man who has been told, perhaps too often, that his experiences are interesting. They may well be. His poetry, regrettably, is not. The images are borrowed, the metre is inconsistent, and the emotional register lurches between borrowed grandeur and a sentimentality that would embarrass a young lady's album. One detects, beneath the Byronic posturing, a sensibility that might yet produce something worth reading, but not, on this evidence, in verse.
She paused and read the final line aloud to the empty room. She always tested a finished passage by ear. Sound caught what the eye forgave. Then she nodded. 4 attempts, and at last it was right.
One hopes Mr. Blackwood will find his subject. He has not found it yet.
Cassandra folded the pages to send to Philippa by the morning post. She felt no guilt. The review was honest, the criticism justified, and if Mr. Blackwood was wounded by it, then perhaps he would write something better next time or turn his talents elsewhere. Either outcome would be a service to the literary world. She sealed the letter, blew out the candle, and went to bed satisfied. She did not yet know that she would meet him within the fortnight. Christopher Blackwood, known to his friends as Kit, read the review standing up, at the side table where the lantern lay open among the other periodicals. The club was busy enough that, when he understood what he was reading, there was nowhere to sit and recover himself without being noticed. The magazine was already thumbed soft by other hands. He had turned to the reviews with the pleasant confidence of a man expecting to find his own name praised. He found it in the third column, and for a brief, foolish moment he was pleased. Then he read the thing. He read it twice, the first time quickly, catching the insult before the particulars. The second time slowly, with the careful attention of a man touching a bruise he ought to have left alone. The worst of it was that the reviewer wrote beautifully. The sentences were clean and balanced and had the kind of quiet authority that made disagreement feel like poor taste. Whoever had written this had not dashed it off in a temper. They had taken their time, honed every line until it cut without seeming to make an effort, and the result was not anger but disappointment, which was worse by far. The last line was the most devastating. One hopes Mr. Blackwood will find his subject. He has not found it yet. Kit closed the magazine, set it down with exaggerated care, and left the club before anyone could ask what he thought of it. He was 28, tall and broad-shouldered in the way of men who had spent their youth on horseback, with dark hair that curled where it pleased, whatever his valet attempted each morning. His was the sort of handsome face people trusted before they thought to examine it. Warm brown eyes, an easy mouth, features made for smiling and ill-suited to a frown. At present he was a tempting one. The streets of London, which he usually walked through with the loose stride of a man who enjoyed the world around him, passed by him in a blur. By the time he reached his rooms, the anger had not faded, but had settled into something heavier and harder to name. He removed his peacock blue coat with its brass buttons, the same coat he had chosen that morning with such pleasure, and found he could hardly bear to look at it now. Then he sat down at his desk. The desk was not tidy. No surface Kit owned was tidy. Papers covered every inch of it in overlapping drifts, weighed down by an ink bottle, a cavalry pistol he used as a paperweight, and a cold cup of coffee that had stood there far too long. Beneath the topmost disorder, half hidden under a folio of blank pages, lay a manuscript in his own hand. Not verse, and not the sort of work the world expected from Christopher Blackwood. It belonged to the late hours, to locked doors and banked fires, to a part of his mind he kept carefully separate from the bright coats, easy manners and fashionable poems that bore his name. He drew it out, read the last paragraph he had written, and picked up his pen. In it, a ruined manor stood on the Yorkshire moors. Rain lashed the broken windows. A woman with more courage than sense was going down a staircase no sensible person would have trusted, and something was waiting for her at the bottom. He wrote for an hour without stopping, the review forgotten, or at least pushed beneath the surface, the prose coming fast and unpolished, and alive in a way his poetry never quite managed. He was mid-sentence. The woman had found the door. It was locked. Behind her, the sound was creeping closer, when Freddie Jessup walked in without knocking, as Freddie always did, and Kit covered the pages with the folio in a movement so practiced it barely looked deliberate.
"Are you coming to dinner? I am famished,"
Freddie said, already wearing his coat. Freddie was the same age as Kit, sandy-haired and square-shouldered, with a broad, honest face, wholly unsuited to concealment. He had been in Kit's regiment, had followed him home after the war with the cheerful determination of a loyal hound, and possessed the comfortable habit of taking people as he found them. He admired Kit's poetry with perfect loyalty and no discernible understanding of it. Kit looked at the folio, at the hidden pages beneath it, and felt the final line of the review settle once more against his chest. He reached for another coat, a different one, green this time, with gold thread at the cuffs, and followed Freddie out into the evening. At Lacey Court, in the small study that belonged in name to her husband and in practice to herself, Mrs. Philippa Ashworth was making a list. She made lists often. To Mrs. Ashworth, a well-managed life began with a well-made list. She managed a household with a staff of 14, a kitchen garden famous for its fruit, herbs and preserves, and a literary magazine that carried her husband's name on its first page and her judgment on every one that followed. Humphrey's contribution to the Lantern had begun and ended with a single editorial in the second issue. Mrs. Ashworth had rewritten nearly every word of it, and he had wisely left the magazine to her ever since. He was asleep now in the armchair by the fire, a glass of Madeira balanced on the generous slope of his waistcoat, precarious but clearly practiced. His mouth was slightly open. He was a large man, soft and round-faced, with ruddy cheeks and thinning fair hair combed carefully across the top of his head. His dove-grey silk waistcoat, with its silver buttons, strained bravely over him. He was 45 and looked as though he had been so for some time, having reached the age that suited him and decided to remain there. To Mrs. Ashworth, regarding him with the fond exasperation of 17 years of marriage, he looked perfectly content and entirely unpresentable. Mrs. Ashworth herself was 39, handsome rather than pretty, with chestnut hair and bright hazel-green eyes that seemed always to have reached the next point before anyone else had finished the present one. She wore a deep garnet gown, simply cut and very becoming, the dress of a woman who knew what suited her and could afford to choose it. She returned to her list. This was a guest list, which required more care than most. A house party had many moving parts, and Mrs. Ashworth understood how to set them all in motion. You needed enough people for variety, but not so many that the rooms felt like a London crush. There must be someone to anchor the conversation, someone to lighten it, and at least one person who could be trusted to say the wrong thing at dinner, making everyone else feel clever by comparison. You needed, in short, the right company. Lady Margrave would be invited because she was Humphrey's aunt and could not be left out. She was certain to accept, since the alternative was an autumn in Bath with a sister she could not endure. She would have opinions on everything and offer them freely. But she was family, and Philippa had long ago learned that managing Lady Margrave was easier than recovering from the insult of leaving her out. And then there was Cassandra. Mrs. Ashworth set down her pen and considered Cassandra Fenwick with the practiced eye of a woman accustomed to seeing possibilities before anyone else did. Of all the critics Philippa had published, Cassandra had the finest mind, careful, precise, fearless on the page, in a way she was not always in a drawing room. She deserved more than a pen name in a back parlour. She deserved someone who could see her clearly, and Mrs. Ashworth believed she knew exactly the man. Christopher Blackwood. She had met him twice, once at a dinner in London, once at a reading, where he had been amusing, attentive, and in possession of a yellow waistcoat that should have been ridiculous and somehow was not. He was a poet, which Mrs. Ashworth considered a minor flaw, and, if Cassandra's review was to be trusted, not a very good one. Still, poor verse was not proof of a poor mind. There was more to him than his vivid clothes and easy manners suggested. Mrs. Ashworth had seen it twice, a warmth he tried to make look careless, and a seriousness he kept carefully out of sight. It made her think he and Cassandra might understand each other, if only they could be brought to look past their first impressions. That was partly why she had invited him. The review in the Lantern had been just, but it had also been severe, and Mrs. Ashworth had felt a small, uncomfortable prickle of guilt after publishing it. An invitation to Lacey Court seemed a harmless way to make amends. Good company, good dinners, and the quiet assurance that the Lantern had not dismissed him entirely. She would also invite his friend Freddie Jessop. He was not clever, but he was cheerful, obliging, and ate everything put before him, which would endear him to the cook. As for Mr. Blackwood himself, Philippa suspected that his mind might suit Cassandra better than his poetry had done. Once they were under the same roof, there would be every opportunity to find out. She assumed he would bear the review as gentlemen generally bore criticism, with injured pride, public indifference, and private recovery over a good dinner. Since he had no notion that Cassandra had written the review, there was no reason the acquaintance need begin badly. Miss Ellen Graves, Cassandra's cousin, was quiet and watchful, and one of the few people who could rein Cassandra in when her opinions threatened to outrun her manners. She wrote the last name on the list, sanded the ink, and rang for the footman to carry the invitations to the post. Behind her, Humphrey stirred, rescued his Madeira without opening his eyes, and settled deeper into the chair. Chapter 2. First Sight. The carriage turned off the lane and entered a drive lined with beech trees, their leaves just beginning to gold. After a long day's journey from London, the quiet of Wiltshire felt like a kindness, and Cassandra leaned forward for her first glimpse of Lacey Court. It was not a grand house. That was the first thing she noticed, and gratitude came with it. She had spent enough country weekends in houses built to impress and arranged to intimidate. Marble halls, portrait galleries, drawing rooms that echoed. She had always felt herself grow smaller inside them, speaking less and offering fewer opinions. Lacey Court was different. It was built of golden stone that caught the late afternoon sun and held it, with tall windows looking out over a garden that sloped gently down toward a stream. The house had been added to over generations, without any grand design. A wing here, a conservatory there. The result was a building that looked as though it had grown rather than been designed, comfortable in its own shape, like an old dog settled before the fire. Her cousin Ellen Graves, seated across from her in the carriage, leaned forward to look. Miss Graves was 24, fair-haired and fine-featured, with a pale, composed face and dark blue eyes that seemed to notice a great deal and reveal very little. She was as near to a confidant as Cassandra possessed, not because she offered advice, but because she listened without judgment and remembered everything, which was a comfort or a threat, depending on what one had confessed.
"It's lovely,"
Ellen said quietly.
"Smaller than I expected."
Less grand,
Cassandra replied.
but much more comfortable. That is very like Philippa.
The carriage pulled to a stop, and a footman opened the door. Philippa was already on the front steps, smiling with the easy warmth of a hostess who had been watching for them and was quite willing to be found doing so. She came forward at once, taking Cassandra's hands before Cassandra had fully stepped down.
Cassandra, at last! I was beginning to think the roads had swallowed you.
She turned to Ellen with the same warmth.
And Ellen, how well you look. Come inside. Tea is waiting, and so is cake, though Humphrey has already eaten most of it. Fortunately, I hid a plate.
The entrance hall was panelled in dark wood, with a stone floor softened by old rugs and a plain staircase curving upward at the far end. A fire was burning despite the season, because Philippa believed a house without a fire had not done all it might for its guests, and the warmth met them at the door. In the drawing room, 2 people were already waiting. Lady Margrave had taken possession of the best chair by the fire, as though it had been placed there expressly for her. She was tall, even-seated, silver-haired beneath a lace cap trimmed with purple ribbon, and upright as a candlestick. Her sharp blue eyes were set in a face that had long ago stopped asking to be admired and expected instead to be obeyed. She wore deep plum silk, with a brooch at her throat large enough to declare itself. As Cassandra entered, Lady Margrave regarded her with immediate and thorough inspection, as though she were pricing a horse.
"So this is your clever friend, Philippa?"
Lady Margrave said, not troubling to lower her voice.
"She is thinner than I expected. Does she eat?"
She eats perfectly well, Aunt, and she has only just stepped through the door.
Philippa said evenly.
You may allow her a cup of tea before beginning your inspection. Lady Margrave, may I present Miss Fenwick and her cousin, Miss Graves.
"How do you do?"
Lady Margrave said, extending one hand without rising. Her tone was only just warm enough for politeness, and her look made it plain that Cassandra was still under consideration. Mr. Ashworth was also present, though present was generous. He was asleep in a second armchair with a plate of crumbs balanced on his knee and a glass of Madeira on the table beside him. He stirred at the sound of new arrivals, opened one eye, said,
"Ah, welcome, welcome, splendid!"
and closed it again. Cassandra liked him immediately. When the invitation to Lacey Court arrived, Kit had stared at it for some time. Humphrey Ashworth's name stood at the bottom of the letter, and Humphrey Ashworth's magazine had just carved him very neatly into pieces. For 1 full minute, Kit considered refusing. Freddie saw only the promise of a country house, good dinners, and 2 weeks away from London. Kit saw something uncomfortably like a challenge. Between Freddie's enthusiasm and Kit's pride, the matter was settled. When the day came, the gentlemen reached Lacey Court in the afternoon, bringing with them road dust, good humour, and a bright, unguarded laugh that carried through the open windows of the drawing-room before Cassandra saw its owner. She looked up. Philippa was already on her feet and moving toward the hall with the brisk satisfaction of a hostess who hears the last pieces of her party arriving. Cassandra followed and wished immediately that she had not. 2 men stood in the entrance hall, handing coats and hats to the footmen. The first was a sandy-haired gentleman Cassandra recognized by type before she learned his name. Broad, sunburnt, and wearing a brown coat apparently chosen to survive hedgerows rather than shine in drawing-rooms. He was grinning at something his companion had said, his face bright with uncomplicated good humour. It was the man beside him who made her pause. He was tall and dark-haired, with curls that had resisted every attempt at discipline that morning, and he wore a coat of peacock blue so vivid it seemed to brighten the hall around him. Beneath it, a cream silk waistcoat embroidered with gold thread caught the light from the hall windows. His cravat was pinned with something that glinted. She could not tell whether it was a jewel or only polished brass making the best of itself. The overall effect was of a man who had dressed not to disappear but to be noticed, and who expected to be admired for it. He had a handsome, well-cut face, with warm brown eyes and an easy mouth that settled naturally into a smile. He moved with the loose confidence of a former cavalry officer, a man accustomed to command and not entirely cured of the habit of being obeyed. He was, Cassandra thought, exactly the sort of man with whom she least wished to be trapped under one roof. Then, to her dismay, Philippa said his name.
Miss Fenwick, may I present Mr. Blackwood and Mr. Jessup? Gentlemen, Miss Fenwick, my dear friend, and one of the finest minds I know.
Mr. Blackwood. Christopher Blackwood, the cavalry officer whose Byronic posturing she had dissected line by line in the latest issue of The Lantern, signed Atticus, and posted to Philippa less than 3 weeks ago. He was bowing to her. He was smiling. He had no idea. Cassandra felt the blood leave her face, then rush back hotly. She could only pray it did not show. She made her curtsy, murmured something resembling, "How do you do?" and avoided looking at Philippa, who stood nearby with an expression of serene satisfaction, as though everything were proceeding exactly as she had intended. Mr. Blackwood straightened from his bow and looked at her properly for the first time. Whatever he saw, her stiffness, the colour in her cheeks, the careful blankness of her expression, Cassandra could see him forming his conclusion. A blue-stocking, severe, clever, and not at all inclined to be charmed.
Miss Fenwick,
He said, with the easy warmth of a man accustomed to having it returned.
Mrs. Ashworth gives me reason to expect excellent conversation.
How kind.
Cassandra said, in a voice that could have frozen a pond. By dinner, Philippa was operating with the cheerful confidence of a woman who believed every difficulty could be managed if seated correctly. Cassandra found herself directly across from Mr. Blackwood, close enough that silence would have looked deliberate. Cassandra had spent the hours between the introduction and dinner arranging her composure with the same care she brought to a review, building her sentences in advance, rehearsing just the right degree of pleasant indifference. She could be civil. She had been civil in worse circumstances than this. She simply needed to say nothing interesting, reveal nothing true, and get through dinner without incident. Mr. Blackwood's opinions made that impossible. He talked the way he dressed, with colour, with confidence, with the easy assumption that the room was glad to hear him. He had opinions about the season's novels, about a production of Shakespeare he had seen at Drury Lane, about a new essay in the Edinburgh Review that he found overpraised. He offered these opinions readily, with a smile that made contradiction seem almost welcome. Cassandra tried not to accept the invitation, but he was wrong. He was wrong about the novels, charmingly wrong, confidently wrong, but wrong, And the particular nature of his error was so exactly the sort of error she spent her professional life correcting that staying silent felt almost bodily, like holding back a sneeze.
I cannot agree with you about the latest novel from Colburn's press,
She said, and heard her own voice arrive at the table with more edge than she had intended.
The plotting is uneven, but the characterization is unusually fine. To dismiss it on the strength of one weak chapter is to miss the accomplishment of the other 12.
Mr. Blackwood looked at her with genuine surprise, and then with something warmer. Interest, perhaps, or the first hint of it.
You have read it closely.
He said.
I read everything closely, Mr. Blackwood.
Clearly.
He smiled.
And do you always form such decided opinions?
Only when the subject deserves one.
Lady Margrave, from the head of the table, watched this exchange with the open interest of a woman who had just found the most entertaining thing in the room. Mr. Jessop, seated beside her, looked between them with the mild confusion of a man watching a sport whose rules he did not know. Mr. Ashworth ate his fish. Philippa, at the foot of the table, caught Cassandra's eye and smiled. A small, private, hopeful smile that Cassandra could not return. Cassandra had always admired Philippa's talent for arranging other people's lives. She admired it considerably less when the life being arranged was her own. A warning that Mr. Blackwood would be attending would have been civil, humane even. Had Cassandra known, she doubted very much that she would have come. Philippa prided herself on her matchmaking, and until now, Cassandra had managed to keep herself beyond its reach. It seemed her luck had run out. Philippa had deliberately seated Mr. Blackwood across from the woman who had dismantled his poetry in print, trusting, no doubt, that a clever argument or two would improve the acquaintance. Cassandra thought this optimism wildly misplaced. She had never been more eager for 5 minutes alone with Philippa. Chapter 3. Skirmishes. The next morning brought rain. The party was confined to the house, and Cassandra found there was no escaping Mr. Blackwood. Cassandra had hoped for a walk. The gardens at Lacey Court sloped down toward a stream bordered by willows, and she had noticed a path through the beech woods on the higher ground that looked as though it might lead somewhere quiet enough to think. Instead, she found herself in the drawing-room with a book she could not attend to, while Mr. Blackwood held court from the sofa. He was wearing a burgundy coat. She did not know why this irritated her, except that it was impossible not to notice. The coat was the colour of very good claret, cut close across the shoulders, and worn with an ivory silk waistcoat embroidered along the edges, leaves, she thought, or possibly vines. He looked as though he had dressed for a portrait sitting, rather than a wet morning in Wiltshire. The conversation had turned to poetry, because conversation seemed determined to turn to poetry whenever Mr. Blackwood was in the room. He was discussing the latest volume of fashionable verse with the easy confidence of a man who believed any room improved by hearing him. Lady Margrave was listening with the forbidding expression of a woman who had heard enough poetry in her lifetime to last several more. Mr. Jessop was not listening at all, but was examining a bowl of apples on the sideboard with the grave attention of a man deciding which to eat first. Mr. Ashworth had not yet appeared, though someone had discovered a half-finished plate of breakfast in the morning-room, suggesting that he was alive, awake, and proceeding through the house at his own pace.
The trouble with Moore,
Mr. Blackwood was saying, leaning back with his arm along the sofa,
is that he mistakes prettiness for feeling. Every line is polished until the life has gone out of it. One admires the surface and remembers nothing.
Cassandra turned a page she had not read. He was not entirely wrong about Moore, which was irritating, because she would have preferred him to be entirely wrong about everything.
You do not agree, Miss Fenwick?
He had noticed her silence, or rather, noticed the quality of her silence, the particular stillness of someone biting back a response.
I think you are half right,
she said, without looking up from her book.
Moore's lyrics can be shallow, but to say he mistakes prettiness for feeling is to assume prettiness and feeling cannot coexist, which is a peculiar position for a man in a burgundy coat.
The room went briefly quiet. Mr. Jessop looked up from the bowl of apples. Lady Margrave made a sound that might have been a laugh and suppressed it too late. Mr. Blackwood stared at her for a moment, then smiled, not the easy, practiced smile he had worn at dinner, but something sharper and less expected.
You have a gift for criticism, Miss Fenwick.
So I've been told, Mr. Blackwood.
I should not like to be on the wrong end of it.
Then I suggest you take care, Mr. Blackwood,
she said, and allowed herself the faintest smile. Lady Margrave turned to Philippa, who had been writing letters at the desk by the window, and said,
I like this one. She has teeth.
Philippa did not look up, but her pen stopped moving for just a moment before it resumed. Mr. Jessup, having selected his apple, bit into it with a crunch loud enough to startle himself, and the conversation moved on to safer ground: the weather, the roads, and whether the rain might clear by afternoon. Cassandra returned to her book. She could feel Mr. Blackwood's attention linger, as unmistakable as heat from the fire, and she kept her eyes on the page until he looked away.
He is insufferable,
Cassandra said. She sat in Ellen's room, on the window seat, while rain streaked the glass behind her. Ellen was embroidering a handkerchief with small, precise stitches, and did not look up.
You have said so 3 times.
because it remains true.
What precisely is insufferable about him?
Ellen asked mildly. Cassandra opened her mouth, closed it, and tried to arrange her irritation into something that sounded like an argument.
He talks too much. He dresses as though every room is a stage. He offers opinions on literature with the authority of a man who has never imagined himself mistaken, and he smiles as though one ought to thank him for the privilege.
And his opinions are bad?
That is the worst of it. They are not bad. They are nearly good, which is far more aggravating, because it means he is capable of thinking clearly and simply does not trouble himself to go far enough.
Rather like his poetry,
Ellen said, without looking up. Cassandra pulled at a loose thread on her sleeve and said nothing. Through the window the rain was easing, and the beech woods on the ridge had turned a dark, glossy green.
You must be careful with him.
Ellen said, setting down her needle.
I am being careful.
You are arguing with him about books. For you, that is very nearly a confession. The review appeared less than a month ago. If he discovers that Atticus is sitting across from him at dinner,
He will not discover it. Nobody knows except Philippa, and Philippa would sooner burn the lantern to ash than compromise a contributor.
Cassandra rested her chin on her knees.
She claims she invited him out of kindness because the review was severe and she wished to soften the blow. Perhaps she did. But Philippa has never been content to mend one thing when she might arrange 3 others at the same time.
Ellen glanced up.
and you think she is matchmaking?
I think Philippa considers matchmaking a branch of household management.
Ellen's needle paused.
And the review?
Cassandra pulled the loose thread a little too hard.
The review was honest, Ellen. His poetry is exactly what I said it was. Borrowed feelings in borrowed language. I would write every word of it again tomorrow.
I do not doubt it. But you expected to dislike him.
I do dislike him.
Yes, but not comfortably.
Ellen said, selecting another thread. Cassandra looked at her sharply, but she could not deny that the words had a ring of truth. It would have been easier if Mr. Blackwood had been exactly what she had first decided he was: vain, shallow, and pleased with himself. A peacock in a burgundy coat, a man all colour and confidence. She had been prepared for that. She had known what to do with that. What she had not been prepared for was the quickness of his mind when he forgot to perform. The way he listened when contradicted, not meekly, not graciously, but with real attention. The way his bad opinions were not stupid ones, only unfinished, as though he had come to the edge of a thought and then turned away because the room had laughed too soon. That was what vexed her. A foolish man could be dismissed, a vain one could be endured. But Mr. Blackwood was neither foolish enough nor vain enough to make dislike simple.
I am not troubled,
She said.
You have been pulling at that thread for 5 minutes.
Ellen replied.
If you continue, you will lose your cuff.
Cassandra let go of the thread. Ellen picked up her needle again and resumed her embroidery, having made her point and seen no need to press it. Miss Fenwick made no sense to Kit, and it bothered him. He was in the billiard room with Freddie, who was losing badly and did not mind. Freddie played billiards as he did most things, with enthusiasm, no strategy, and the unshakable conviction that the next shot would be better.
She does not like me.
Kit said, lining up an easy shot.
Who?
Freddie asked.
Miss Fenwick.
Freddie considered this with the grave attention he reserved for problems he had no intention of solving.
Does it matter? Certainly not. I was merely making an observation. You have been making it all morning. You missed your last shot because you were thinking of her.
Freddie bent over the table, squinted, and sent the cue ball in entirely the wrong direction.
Perhaps she is shy.
Kit snorted.
She is not shy. She corrected my opinion of Moore and my coat in the same breath. That is not shyness, Freddie. That is marksmanship.
Freddie considered this.
Seemed to hit the mark to me. That is precisely the difficulty.
Kit played another shot, watched the ball drop, and straightened. He had met severe young ladies before. London drawing rooms were not short of them. But Miss Fenwick's severity was of a different order. She appeared to regard his manners, his wardrobe, and his opinions as three separate offences, and he could not decide which judgment wounded him most. The review had left him more vulnerable to criticism than he cared to admit, and Miss Fenwick possessed sharp judgment in abundance. No wonder she had got under his skin, though he had no intention of admitting it.
Another game?
Freddie asked hopefully.
Not now. There is something I must see to. Then I shall go and see whether luncheon is being encouraged,
Freddie said. He wandered off in the direction of the kitchen, and Kit sat at the writing desk in the corner of the billiard room. He took the folded pages from his coat pocket, smoothed them flat, and read the last paragraph. The heroine was trapped in a passage beneath the ruined manor. Her candle was guttering, water ran down the walls, the air smelled of earth and age. Ahead of her, beyond the reach of the candle, something drew a heavy, uneven breath. He wrote steadily. The room fell away by degrees, leaving only the passage beneath the ruined manor, the guttering candle, and the brave, foolish woman walking farther into the dark. In those pages, no one expected fashionable melancholy from him. The sentences came quickly and without apology. His heroine was stubborn, brave, and entirely unwilling to wait for rescue. He liked her enormously. His first Gothic novel had gone into the world under the name R. Bellamy Vale, and to his astonishment had found readers. They praised the book's invention, shuddered over its locked rooms and midnight passages, and never once suspected that its author also published fashionable verse under his own name. Gothic novels were understood to be women's reading. Everyone said so. They were devoured by young ladies in country houses, passed between sisters, hidden inside volumes of sermons, and dismissed by serious literary men as sensation and nonsense. If it were ever discovered that Christopher Blackwood, former officer of the 11th Light Dragoons and published poet, was also the author of The Phantom of Ravelsmoor, he would not be laughed out of one drawing room. He would be laughed out of all of them. Freddie alone would remain untroubled, chiefly because Freddie had never finished a novel in his life, and would not understand why writing one should be a disgrace. He wrote until the dressing bell rang, then folded the pages and slipped them inside his waistcoat before going upstairs to change for dinner. He chose the green coat with the gold thread at the cuffs. If Miss Fenwick had made a principle of not being impressed, he saw no harm in testing the strength of it. Chapter 4. Proximity. The rain cleared overnight, and Philippa, who never missed an opportunity to set other people in motion, proposed a walk to the ruins.
There is an old chapel on the ridge,
She announced at breakfast, with the bright authority of a woman whose suggestion had already become a plan.
1/2 mile through the beech woods. The path is good, the views are excellent, and the exercise will do us all good after a day indoors.
Mr. Ashworth, who had been applying himself to eggs and cold ham with steady devotion, looked up with mild alarm.
A walk?
You need not come, Humphrey.
Ah, splendid.
He returned to his ham with visible relief. Lady Margrave declared that she would come. She had opinions on old chapels, ancient stones, and whether the present generation had the least notion how to appreciate either. Mr. Jessup was enthusiastic. Ellen was willing enough. Mr. Blackwood said he would be delighted and looked at Cassandra as he said it. Cassandra had no plausible reason to refuse, and several excellent reasons to avoid spending the morning in Mr. Blackwood's company. She smiled, said she would be very happy to join them, and meant not a syllable of it. The path through the beech woods was narrow enough that the party could not walk in a group, and Philippa, who had the instincts of a general and the subtlety of a canon, contrived matters so that Mr. Blackwood and Cassandra were walking together before either of them quite understood how it had happened. Ellen, recognizing the maneuver, gave Cassandra a look of quiet sympathy from behind. She had been paired with Mr. Jessup, who was telling her about a horse he had once owned, with every sign of believing the subject universally fascinating. The beech trees were tall and close, their canopy still thick with green, though here and there a branch had begun to gold. The morning light came through in long, shifting shafts that moved across the path as the wind stirred the leaves overhead. The ground was soft from the rain, and the air smelled of wet earth and bark.
You are very quiet, Miss Fenwick.
Mr. Blackwood said, after they had walked long enough for the silence to grow heavy.
I am walking, Mr. Blackwood. Walking does not require commentary.
It does not require it, no. But I find most things are improved by conversation.
That has not been my experience.
He laughed. It was not the polished, social laugh she had heard at dinner. It was shorter and more genuine, much like the smile she had startled from him in the drawing room. Cassandra was not pleased to find that she liked the sound of it. They walked on. Ahead, Lady Margrave was setting a pace that suggested she meant to conquer the ridge rather than enjoy it. Behind them, Mr. Jessop's horse story had progressed to a detailed account of its temperament, and Ellen was listening with the patient grace of a woman who had accepted her fate. The ruins stood at the top of the ridge, a single ivy-covered wall of grey stone, with the remains of an arched window framing the valley below. It was not much, a chapel that had been old before the Tudors and was now little more than a picturesque corner for a watercolourist. But the view through the broken window was striking. The whole of the valley opened out beneath it, the stream a silver line through green fields, and Lacey Court, small and golden in the distance. Cassandra stood at the window and looked out. The wind was stronger on the ridge, carrying the smell of the woods and something sharper. Wet stone, rain, and old mortar. She rested her hand on the stone ledge and felt the roughness beneath her fingers.
It is a good place,
Mr. Blackwood said, coming to stand beside her. He was looking at the view, not at her, and his voice had lost its usual flourish.
I have always liked places like this.
Ruins?
She asked.
Ruins, old stones, anything that has survived longer than people expected it to.
He glanced at the broken arch.
There is something restful in a place that no longer has to impress anyone.
She looked at him then. His face in profile was thoughtful, the easy charm absent for once, and she had the uncomfortable sense that there was more to him than bright coats and careless smiles.
That is a strange sentiment from a man who takes such care over his wardrobe.
His mouth curved, but he did not look away from the valley.
Perhaps that is why I like it.
Cassandra had meant to cut deeper. Instead, she found herself wondering what exactly he meant. They stood for a moment in a silence unlike the one on the path. This one was less guarded and far less easy to dismiss. The walk back was easier. The party spread out along the path, and Cassandra found herself behind Mr. Blackwood rather than beside him, where she could watch without being watched in return. It was Lady Margrave, unexpectedly, who showed her something new. The path descended steeply where the ridge sloped down toward the garden, and the rain had left the ground treacherous, slick leaves over mud, with tree roots crossing the track at intervals. Lady Margrave, who had conquered the ascent by refusing to admit that age had any claims upon her, found the descent less willing to be ignored. She placed her foot on a root, lost her balance, and for one alarming moment she swayed. Mr. Blackwood caught her arm. He did it without fuss, without ceremony, and without making a performance of it. He stepped forward and steadied her, then offered his arm as though it had been his intention all along. After that, he adjusted his pace to hers, steering her around the worst of the mud without making the assistance feel like assistance. Lady Margrave, who would sooner have fallen into the stream than admitted she needed help, allowed it. That was what struck Cassandra most. Lady Margrave, who had opinions about everything and patience for very little, permitted Mr. Blackwood to take her arm and did not say a word about it. He had preserved her pride so neatly that she had no need to defend it. They reached the bottom of the slope, and Mr. Blackwood released her as naturally as he had steadied her. Lady Margrave said,
"The path wants mending,"
which was as close as she would ever come to gratitude, and walked on toward the house without looking back. Cassandra watched Mr. Blackwood. He was already talking to Mr. Jessup about the ruins, his manner as bright and careless as ever, as though the small kindness on the path had cost him nothing at all. But it had not been careless. She had seen it clearly, the way he saw the danger before anyone else had time to move, the way he offered help before it could be refused, the way he protected Lady Margrave's dignity as carefully as her balance. It did not fit. The man of bright coats and easy speeches had read Lady Margrave's pride in an instant and answered it without a word. That evening, the drawing-room settled into the comfortable warmth of a party that had spent the afternoon out of doors and was glad of the fire. Mr. Ashworth had claimed his accustomed chair and his glass of Madeira and was asleep before the tea things were cleared. Philippa sat with her letters. Ellen was reading. Mr. Jessup was explaining the rules of a card game to Lady Margrave, who was allowing him to explain only so that she might correct him. Cassandra sat near the window with a cup of tea she did not drink, and found herself watching Mr. Blackwood across the room. He was talking to Philippa, and whatever he was saying was making her laugh, a real laugh, warm and unguarded, not the polite sound a hostess makes for a guest's benefit. He was wearing the green coat again, the one with the gold thread, and in the firelight the thread caught and released the glow as he moved. Lady Margrave, who missed nothing, caught Cassandra watching and raised one silver eyebrow. She said nothing. She did not need to. The eyebrow was quite sufficient, and Cassandra looked away too quickly to pretend she had not been caught.
"Miss Fenwick,"
Lady Margrave said, in the carrying voice of a woman who had never found discretion useful.
"you must tell me your opinion of the ruins. You were very attentive on the walk. I noticed you taking a very close interest in the view."
It was not the view Lady Margrave meant, and they both knew it.
The chapel was charming.
Cassandra said carefully.
The view was worth the climb.
"Indeed,"
Lady Margrave said.
"quite one of the finest views in Wiltshire."
Her eyes moved, just for a moment, to Mr. Blackwood by the fireplace, then returned to Cassandra with an expression of perfect innocence. Cassandra had the uncomfortable certainty that the gesture had been meant for her alone. That might have been the end of it, had Mr. Ashworth not opened one eye.
Finest view in Wiltshire?
He murmured. No one had expected him to wake up. Lady Margrave, who had plainly been relying upon his silence, looked faintly put out. Mr. Ashworth shifted in his chair, discovered his Madeira still within reach, and took a careful sip.
The finest view in Wiltshire is from the breakfast room at 9:30, when one has no appointments before noon and the kidneys have been properly done.
Humphrey,
Philippa said, without looking up from her letter.
you are not improving the conversation.
I rarely do.
Said Mr. Ashworth, with perfect contentment.
That is why I'm so seldom invited into one.
Cassandra, despite herself, laughed. It was not a large laugh. It escaped before she could prevent it, and she lowered her eyes at once to her tea as though the cup had been responsible. Across the room, Mr. Blackwood turned his head. That, Cassandra thought, was unfortunate. Mr. Ashworth noticed nothing of this, or, if he noticed, he was too kind to say so. He settled deeper into his chair and regarded the company with mild satisfaction.
I have always thought,
He continued,
that a house party succeeds best when no one is made to do anything they dislike before luncheon.
An admirable principle.
Mr. Jessup said earnestly.
"A lazy principle."
Lady Margrave said.
Very likely,
said Mr. Ashworth.
But laziness has been much maligned by those energetic souls who are forever arranging walks to ruins.
Philippa's pen paused. Cassandra saw it. So did Lady Margrave. Mr. Blackwood turned his face away, but not before Cassandra caught the edge of his smile. Philippa set down her letter.
Are you accusing me of tyranny, Humphrey?
Never, my dear. I am praising your industry from a safe distance.
Cassandra laughed again, and this time she did not quite hide it. Mr. Ashworth reached for one of the little cakes on the tea tray. Philippa looked up.
Humphrey, you have had 3.
Yes.
He said.
That is why I am taking only one.
He selected the smallest cake, considered this act of restraint with visible admiration, and then took a larger one as well.
A man should not be too proud to correct an error.
Cassandra looked down at her untouched tea. She had taken Mr. Ashworth for indolent good nature and very little else. It occurred to her now that a man might do very little and still improve a room. That, Cassandra decided, was a talent. Mr. Ashworth finished his cake, closed his eyes, and said,
There, I have contributed.
To what?
Lady Margrave demanded.
The evening.
You have contributed crumbs.
A man gives what he can,
said Mr. Ashworth, and went peacefully back to sleep. Chapter 5. The Thaw. Cassandra found the library by accident. She had been looking for somewhere to read without interruption. The drawing room seemed to belong to Mr. Blackwood, the morning room to Mr. Ashworth and whatever tray had most recently appeared there, and Ellen's room was too comfortable, too quiet, and far too likely to invite confidences Cassandra was not ready to make. She had tried the garden, but the bench by the stream was still damp from the previous day's rain, and she had retreated indoors again, following a corridor she had not yet explored. At the end of it, she pushed open a door and discovered a room she had not known Lacey Court possessed. It was a small, wood-panelled room, with shelves that ran floor to ceiling on 3 walls, and a window on the 4th that looked out over the kitchen garden. The books were old and haphazard, novels mixed with histories, volumes of sermons wedged between collections of verse, a set of encyclopedias that stopped at the letter N. A desk stood beneath the window, its surface marked by an ink stain, and 2 armchairs were drawn up before an unlit fireplace. The room smelled of dust, leather, and old paper, and Cassandra liked it at once. She chose a chair, opened her book, and read for what might have been 20 minutes before the door opened and Mr. Blackwood walked in. He stopped when he saw her. Cassandra looked up and went still. For a moment they regarded each other with the mutual displeasure of 2 cats obliged to share a windowsill.
I beg your pardon.
He said.
I did not know anyone was here, nor did I intend to be found. Shall I go?
It was said simply, without flourish or persuasion. He stood in the doorway with a book under his arm, she could not see the title, and waited for her answer as though it mattered what she said.
You may stay,
she said, surprising herself.
provided you do not talk about poetry.
He smiled, the unguarded one that seemed to arrive without permission, and took the other chair. They read in silence. Cassandra was aware of him as one is aware of a fire in a room, not looking at it, yet conscious of its warmth and movement. She turned her pages. He turned his. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked softly, marking the quiet rather than disturbing it. After a while, without looking up, she said,
What are you reading?
He hesitated, only for a moment, but she noticed. Then he angled the book so she could read the spine.
Burke,
she said.
Reflections on the Revolution in France.
He replied.
A sober companion for a wet afternoon.
Cassandra might have believed him had Mr. Blackwood not chosen that moment to reach for the tea table beside his chair. The movement dislodged the volume in his hand. Burke slid to the floor with a thud, and from inside it fell a much smaller book, bound in dark blue paper and worn at the corners. For 1 second, neither of them moved. Then Cassandra leaned forward and read the title.
The secret of Blackmere House.
Mr. Blackwood looked at the fallen book with the resignation of a man betrayed by his own respectability.
I assure you, Miss Fenwick, there is an explanation.
I do hope not.
Cassandra said.
Explanations so often spoil things.
I beg you will not expose me.
That depends entirely upon the nature of the offence.
The heroine has been abducted twice. The villain has a secret passage, and there is a ghost that may or may not be a draft.
Cassandra had to suppress the urge to laugh.
And you are enjoying it enormously.
Beyond measure.
He said. The silence that followed was not the silence they had begun with. It was the silence of two people who had accidentally found themselves at ease and were not yet sure what to do about it. They returned to the drawing room separately, by unspoken agreement, as though neither wished to be seen arriving together. Cassandra went first. She took the long way round through the garden, where the late morning sun was finally drying the paths, and tried to compose her thoughts into something less alarming than they felt. Mr. Blackwood had been wearing a coat of deep amber. She had noticed it in the library without meaning to, and now the observation would not leave her alone. The colour had caught the light from the window and glowed warmly against his dark hair, and she had thought, before she could stop herself, that it suited him. This was a problem. She had spent the better part of a week cataloguing Mr. Blackwood's wardrobe as evidence of his vanity. The peacock blue, the burgundy, the green with gold thread. Each coat had seemed further proof of a man who cared more for how he looked than for what he thought. She had treated his clothes as she would a weak stanza in a review, as evidence against him. But the amber coat had not seemed vain. It had seemed considered, chosen with the same care she brought to finding the right word for a sentence. And for the first time she wondered whether the care itself was not shallow after all. Perhaps he dressed as he spoke, with colour, attention, and a pleasure in form that might not be mere vanity. She had not wanted to think this. She had not wanted to notice his sleeve against the arm of the chair, the fine wool catching the light, or the way his hands had curved around his book, long fingers, ink-stained at the edge of the right thumb, which meant, at the very least, that he wrote more than anyone would guess from his published poetry. She filed this observation away and resolved to ignore it. Kit had not intended to tell Freddie anything, but Freddie had a way of drawing out confidences without realizing he was doing it, as a dog obtains biscuits, through patient presence and the complete absence of guile. They were walking the grounds after luncheon. Freddie had his hands in his pockets and his face turned up to the sun. Kit, less comfortably, found his thoughts returning to Miss Fenwick.
Miss Fenwick laughed this morning.
Kit said.
Did she? At me. That seems less promising. It was not entirely at me.
Kit said.
She discovered me with a horrid novel hidden inside a volume of Burke. Burke,
Freddie said thoughtfully.
I have always meant to read him. No, you haven't. No.
Freddie admitted.
But I have always felt I ought to have meant to.
Kit laughed despite himself.
What was the novel?
Freddie asked.
Absurd. The heroine had been abducted twice, the villain had a secret passage, and there was a ghost that may or may not have been a draft.
Freddie considered this.
Why was it hidden? Because it was a horrid novel. Was it very bad? Undoubtedly. And you liked it? Enormously. Then I do not see the difficulty.
They walked on. The beech woods rose on their left, golden green in the afternoon light, and the stream ran silver below the garden. Kit picked up a stone and turned it in his fingers.
The thing that galls me,
he said, after a silence,
is that Atticus was right.
Freddie glanced at him.
The lantern fellow?
Kit threw the stone. It skipped once on the stream and sank.
Yes. The review was sharp, but it struck home. That is considerably harder to forgive. Your poetry is very fine,
Freddie said loyally.
My poetry is fashionable, which is not the same as good. Even I know that, Freddie, though I would rather not.
Freddie frowned down at the stream.
Still, it seems a hard thing to be judged by a man who need not put his own name to it.
Kit glanced at him.
That is rather the point of Atticus. Perhaps, but I do not have to like him.
Kit looked at him, and despite himself, smiled. They walked in silence for a moment. Somewhere behind them, the house was visible through the trees, and the faint sound of Mrs. Ashworth's piano drifted across the garden, quiet enough to make the tune feel private.
Perhaps the fellow may think better of you next time.
Freddie said.
Write something better, and Atticus may alter his opinion.
Kit said nothing. The stone was gone, and the stream ran on. The review had been with him since the morning he had read it standing up at his club. It no longer burned as anger. It remained as something quieter and more difficult. The knowledge that Atticus had struck where he was weakest. That evening the party gathered in the drawing room after dinner. Mr. Ashworth was already asleep. Lady Margrave was holding court. Mrs. Ashworth was pouring tea. Cassandra sat by the window with a book open in her lap, not reading it, because Mr. Blackwood stood by the mantelpiece with a copy of The Lantern open in his hands. He was reading the reviews. She could tell by the stillness of his face. There was no anger in it now, no performance, only the quiet attention of a man returning to something that had wounded him, the way a tongue finds a broken tooth. He closed the magazine, set it down, and rejoined the conversation with a smile that arrived a moment too late. Cassandra saw the delay. She did not think anyone else had. She looked down at her page and saw none of the words on it. Chapter 6. The Midpoint. The rain returned, and with it a restlessness that moved through the house like a draught. Mr. Ashworth retreated to his study with a bottle of port and a plate of cheese. Lady Margrave declared that she would write letters, though Cassandra suspected this meant sitting in the morning room and passing judgment on anyone who walked past the door. Mr. Jessup went in search of the billiard table. Ellen took her embroidery upstairs, which left Cassandra, Mr. Blackwood, and the library. It was not planned. Cassandra was almost certain it was not planned. The library had become, by silent agreement, the room where they were permitted to be quiet together, and Cassandra had found herself returning to it each morning with the half-formed excuse that the light was good, the chairs were deep, and the encyclopedias that stopped at N were a source of ongoing private amusement. That Mr. Blackwood happened to be there was incidental. She was almost certain it was incidental. He was reading when she arrived. Not Burke this time. He had abandoned the pretense. Instead, he held a small cloth-bound volume she did not recognize. He looked up when she entered, and something crossed his face. Not quite a smile, but a fleeting look of pleasure.
Miss Fenwick.
Mr. Blackwood.
She took her chair. He returned to his book. The clock ticked. The rain tapped at the window. It was Cassandra who broke the silence, though she could not afterwards have said why.
What are you reading today? I promise not to judge.
I would not believe that promise for a moment.
But he turned the book so she could see. It was a collection of essays, not fashionable, not new, and familiar from her own shelves. She had reviewed the author twice for The Lantern, favourably both times.
Do you know his work well?
She asked, unable to hide her surprise.
I have read everything he has published.
Mr. Blackwood paused, turning the book in his hands as though weighing whether to continue.
He has the restraint I envy. Every sentence does exactly what it means to do, and nothing more. There is no vanity in it, no ornament begging to be admired.
It was said without performance, without the charming self-deprecation he so often used for cover. He meant it. Cassandra could hear that he meant it, and hearing it unsettled her. She had spent a week believing Mr. Blackwood valued style above substance, yet here he was, speaking of prose with a precision she could not fault, and worse, with a judgment uncomfortably close to her own.
That is a very good description of his style,
she said, and was annoyed to mean it.
You sound surprised.
I am surprised. You do not always choose to be so precise.
I am not usually talking to someone who would notice.
He met her eyes, and for a moment the library was very quiet, and the rain was very loud, and Cassandra, who could usually find a sharp reply in any weather, found none at all. She looked down at her book. She could feel the colour rising in her cheeks, and she turned a page she had already read rather than let him see it. When she glanced up again, he had returned to his essays, but there was something different in the set of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but the ghost of one, as though he knew exactly what had just happened and had the good grace not to say so. The new issue of The Lantern arrived with the afternoon post. Cassandra learned of it only when she came down for tea and found the party assembled around the table, with the magazine open in Mr. Blackwood's hands. He was reading the reviews. She could tell by how carefully he held the pages, as one holds a letter that might contain bad news.
Atticus is in fine form this month.
Mr. Blackwood said, and his voice was light, conversational, and perfectly controlled.
He has made short work of Selwyn's new collection. Here is one of the sharper cuts.
He read a passage aloud. It was one of Cassandra's reviews. She had written it a month ago, sitting at her desk in the back parlour with cold tea at her elbow, and now the words were coming back to her in Mr. Blackwood's voice, in a room full of people who did not know they were hers. She sat very still, folded her hands in her lap, and concentrated on breathing evenly. Ellen, across the room, lowered her eyes with an air of perfect innocence. Cassandra knew that expression far too well.
Devastating.
Lady Margrave said, with evident approval.
Whoever this Atticus is, he does not suffer fools.
No, he does not.
Mr. Blackwood said.
You admire him, then?
Cassandra heard herself say, and immediately wished she had not, because Mr. Blackwood looked at her with an expression she could not read.
I admire his writing,
he said slowly.
The judgment I am less certain of. Atticus is brilliant. No one who reads him could deny that. His prose is exact and his eye is unforgiving. But there is a coldness in it. He sees everything and forgives nothing.
He turned the magazine over in his hands.
I sometimes wonder whether he knows what it costs to be judged with that kind of precision. Whether he remembers there is a person on the other side of the page, someone who cared for the work, someone who sent it into the world hoping it might be met with something gentler than contempt.
He set the magazine down.
But perhaps that is not his concern.
Mrs. Ashworth set down the teapot with rather more care than usual.
The concern of a review,
she said,
is not to comfort the author, though I grant you it need not take pleasure in wounding him.
Mr. Blackwood looked toward her.
And does Atticus take pleasure in it?
No,
Mrs. Ashworth said after a moment.
I do not think he does. But he believes very firmly that praise means nothing unless blame is also honestly given.
Cassandra kept her eyes on her hands. The room moved past it. Mr. Jessup asked about dinner. Lady Margrave offered an opinion about soup. Mr. Ashworth, who had wandered in from his study with cheese crumbs on his waistcoat, settled into his chair with the satisfied air of a man who had accomplished something, though no one could say what. Cassandra sat with her hands folded and her face composed, and the sentence ringing in her ears. He sees everything and forgives nothing. She had meant it as a principle. She had been proud of it. She had built Atticus on exactly that quality, the refusal to soften a judgment out of sympathy, the belief that honest criticism was a form of respect. Mrs. Ashworth was right, of course. A review that feared giving pain was no review at all. And yet, to hear that principle answered by the man it had wounded, not with anger, but with weary restraint, made Cassandra feel, for the first time, the weight of what she had done. Ellen, across the room, caught her eye. Cassandra looked away. That night, after the house had gone quiet and the candles in the corridor had been put out, Philippa sat alone in her study and did not make a list. This was unusual. Philippa always made lists. Lists were how she understood the shape of a problem, how she separated the manageable from the impossible, how she imposed order on a world that, left to its own devices, would certainly make a mess of things. But tonight the problem would not sit still long enough to be listed, because the problem was Cassandra, Mr. Blackwood, and the disaster Philippa had arranged between them. She had seen it at tea. She had seen it for days, if she was honest, but at tea it had become impossible to dismiss. Cassandra had sat very straight while Mr. Blackwood read the review aloud, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her face composed with such care that Philippa knew at once it was not composure at all. Philippa knew Cassandra's silences. She knew the silence of boredom, the silence of contempt, and the silence that came when Cassandra had said something true and discovered too late that truth could still wound. That was the silence Cassandra wore now. And Mr. Blackwood, the way he had spoken about Atticus, not with injured pride alone, but with the reluctant respect of a man who knew the blow had landed because it was true. He had said it because he was honest, even though the honesty had cost him something. He could not know Cassandra could be wounded by his words. But Philippa had seen enough. She had seen Cassandra's stillness at tea and the guilt beneath it. She had seen Mr. Blackwood look up whenever Cassandra entered a room, and Cassandra look away whenever she found herself pleased by him. Their arguments had altered too. They were no longer merely trying to win, they had begun, dangerously, to consider one another's point of view. Philippa had published the review that stood between them. She had read Cassandra's assessment of Mr. Blackwood's poetry, admired its sharpness, set it in type, and sent it into the world under the name Atticus. When she invited him to Lacey Court, she had told herself the danger was slight. Cassandra's identity was secure. Mr. Blackwood would never know that the woman across from him had dismantled his poetry in print. At worst, Philippa had expected a little private discomfort on Cassandra's side, the sort Cassandra would turn into wit and then dismiss. Philippa did not repent publishing the review. That was the worst of it, perhaps. The review had been severe, but it had not been false, and the lantern would be a useless little ornament if it praised every volume out of tenderness for the person who had written it. She had not expected Mr. Blackwood's hurt to be so plain. Still less had she expected Cassandra to care so much that she had caused it. Philippa could interfere. That thought, at least, she allowed herself to examine. She could stop placing them beside one another at dinner. She could cease arranging walks and errands and little accidents of proximity. She could draw Cassandra aside and tell her, plainly, that the matter could not remain as it was. She could even tell Mr. Blackwood that the lantern had dealt too severely with him, and that she regretted the pain of it, without giving away the hand that had written the words. But she could not tell him the truth. That was not hers to give. Cassandra's name, Cassandra's work, Cassandra's carefully guarded place in a world that would dismiss her the moment it knew she was a woman. All of that belonged to Cassandra. Whether this was wisdom or cowardice, Philippa could not be certain. She suspected it was both. She picked up her pen, put it down again, and sat for a long time watching the fire burn low. In the armchair opposite, Humphrey slept. His Madeira stood untouched on the side table. His waistcoat rose and fell with the peaceful rhythm of a man who believed most difficulties could be improved by supper and softened with wine. Philippa envied him, briefly and without malice. Then she gently roused him, waited while he blinked himself awake, and took him upstairs. Chapter 7. The Gothic Discovery. It began, as most inconvenient things at Lacey Court seemed to begin, with rain. The rain had not stopped for 2 days, and the house party had begun to fray at the edges, as house parties do when there is nothing to be done, nowhere to go, and everyone has exhausted their supply of indoor amiability. Mr. Jessup had played so much billiards that he had begun addressing the balls by name. Lady Margrave had read every periodical in the morning room and had moved on to criticising the curtains. Mr. Ashworth had fallen asleep in 3 separate chairs. Cassandra, who could usually occupy herself indefinitely with a book and a window, found that she could not settle. She had tried the library. Mr. Blackwood was there, and she had discovered, to her irritation, that she could no longer read easily in his presence. He did not disturb her in any ordinary sense. He merely existed nearby, which proved far worse. She kept glancing up to see whether he was glancing up, and when he was not, she felt annoyed to be disappointed. When he was, she turned a page too quickly and lost her place. She left the library, climbed the stairs, and went looking for a room where she could be alone with her own poor judgment. Lacey Court was not a great house, but it had enough turns and passages for Cassandra to find herself somewhere she had not meant to go. The east corridor, Philippa had mentioned in passing, held a small sitting room that was sometimes used as a second study. It would be quiet, it would be empty. She could sit there and read without the persistent distraction of Mr. Blackwood's profile against the firelight. The door was ajar. No one was inside, but someone had plainly been there only moments before. A writing desk stood beneath the window, its surface scattered with papers held down by a brass weight in the shape of a sleeping hound. An inkwell stood open, its rim dark with recent use. A pen lay beside it, as though it had been set down only moments before. Cassandra knew better than to look. One did not read another person's papers uninvited, and whatever she believed about a critic's right to examine published work, those principles did not extend to manuscripts left openly on desks in borrowed rooms. She took one step back toward the door. Then she looked again at the papers beneath the brass hound. She crossed to the desk. The handwriting was Mr. Blackwood's. She knew it at once. She had seen the same loose, impatient hand in the volume of Burke, where he had written his name on the inside cover. Letters that leaned forward as though they could not wait for the sentence to catch up. There were crossings out, second thoughts, whole passages struck through and rewritten in the margins. This was a work in progress, the mess of a mind still arguing with itself. She read the first lines.
The house stood at the edge of the moor as though it had been placed there by someone who wished it to be forgotten. The wind that moved through its empty rooms carried with it the sound of a door that had been closed for 30 years.
It was not poetry, it was prose. Long, sprawling, unpolished prose. A Gothic novel. Cassandra sat down. She did not mean to read more than a page. The manuscript, which was plainly a novel, with chapters marked in pencil and character names circled where they had been changed, concerned a young woman who had inherited a house on the Yorkshire moors from an uncle she had never met. The house was wrong in ways that accumulated slowly. A corridor that seemed longer in one direction than the other. A portrait whose subject aged visibly between morning and evening. A locked room on the 3rd floor from which, on certain nights, came the slow drag of chains across the boards. The young woman was not a fool. She catalogued the strangeness methodically, kept a journal, and refused to be frightened by anything she could not account for. But the house was patient. It knew her better than she knew herself, and what it wanted was not fear, but the truth she would not name. It was good. Cassandra set down the pages, pressed her hands flat on the desk, and stared at the sleeping brass hound as though it owed her an explanation. It was not polished. The pacing sagged in places. His sentences sometimes ran past their natural end, clause following clause, as though he could not quite bring himself to release the thought. That the writing had a quality his poetry lacked entirely. It breathed. His poetry stood stiffly and waited to be admired. This prose moved with restless, untidy life. The heroine had been drawn with uncomfortable precision. She was sharp, watchful, and far too certain that understanding a thing meant mastering it. The house required something she was not willing to give. Cassandra could not yet tell what that something was, but she suspected the answer would be unflattering. She picked up another page. The scene was set in the locked room. The woman had finally found the key, hidden inside the journal she carried everywhere, and had opened the door to find not a ghost, not a corpse, not any of the expected horrors, but a desk, a chair, and a stack of letters in her own handwriting, letters she had never written. Cassandra put the page down. She stood up, crossed the room, and stood at the window. The rain was coming down in sheets, and the garden below was a blur of grey and green, and she could see her own reflection in the glass, faintly, as though she were a figure in someone else's story, seen through glass. Mr. Blackwood wrote Gothic novels. The man who presented himself to the world as a poet, who dressed in colours that announced themselves from across a room, and who could make even his vanity sound almost amusing, went upstairs when the house was quiet, and wrote about haunted rooms and letters that wrote themselves. About a woman who was too clever to be frightened and too proud to admit when she was wrong. And it was good. That was what she could not put aside. She had read his poetry with professional attention and judged it precisely, polished in places, fashionable in its melancholy, and fundamentally shallow. Work that cared more about how it sounded than what it said. She had been right about the poetry. She was certain of that. But she had made the error of believing the promise she had detected in his poetry had not yet taken shape. She thought of the review she had written and the sentence she had been proud of. One hopes Mr. Blackwood will find his subject. He has not found it yet. She had meant it as a judgment, cool and clear and true. Now she wondered whether it had only been true of the work he had chosen to show the world. She had examined what was in front of her and pronounced her verdict, and the verdict had been fair as far as it went, but it had not gone far enough. Mr. Blackwood had found his subject. He had simply found it in pages she had never been meant to see. She gathered the pages, squared their edges, and set them back beneath the brass hound exactly as she had found them. Then she left the room and closed the door behind her. She did not tell him. She told herself there were reasons, that the pages had been private, that Atticus must remain private, that a man like Mr. Blackwood would not wish anyone to know he wrote Gothic novels. All of that was true enough, but none of it explained the weight of the secret once she had chosen to keep it. She watched him at dinner that evening as she might have studied a difficult passage. Closely, carefully, and with more interest than she wished to admit. He was telling a story about a disastrous reading in Covent Garden, and the table was laughing, and his timing was good, his gestures precise and practiced, and Cassandra could see now what she had not seen before. The performance was real, but it was not the whole truth. Beneath the easy charm, beneath the bright clothes and the well-turned phrase, there was a man who went upstairs and wrote about a strange house that knew things its inhabitants could not bear to face. She caught herself smiling at a line that was not particularly clever, and stopped.
You are quiet this evening, Miss Fenwick,
Lady Margrave said.
Are you unwell?
Not at all, I am merely listening.
Mr. Blackwood glanced at her. It was a brief glance, nothing more, but Cassandra felt it and had to steady herself. She met his eyes. She looked away. She reached for her wine and found it already empty. She had spent a week arguing with this man about books, criticism, and the difference between ornament and meaning, and all the while the truest thing she had seen from him was somewhere upstairs, hidden from every eye but hers. He had not mentioned it once. Of course he had not. A former officer and fashionable poet could hardly defend himself by confessing to writing Gothic novels, but that only made the discovery more unsettling. She had judged the part of him he allowed the world to see and thought herself precise. Now she understood that even an accurate judgment could be an incomplete one. After dinner, the party settled into the drawing room. Mr. Blackwood took the chair beside hers. This was not unusual. The seating had begun to arrange itself without anyone admitting to the arrangement, and Cassandra had stopped pretending she did not notice.
You were unusually quiet at dinner.
Lady Margrave has already informed me of it. I had not realized my silence was such an event.
It is, when you are usually the person most worth hearing.
It was said lightly, with the half-smile she had learned to distrust, but tonight it landed differently. Tonight she heard the compliment beneath the charm and could not dismiss it, because she knew now that he kept more hidden than his smile suggested.
I was considering something,
she said.
Then I hope the subject survived the attention.
about something I was not expecting to find.
Mr. Blackwood's expression did not change, but something behind it shifted. A flicker of attention, quickly governed.
And may I ask what proved so absorbing?
An essay,
she said, which was not a lie, though it was not the answer to the question he had asked.
on how often we mistake reputation for truth.
She did not know why she had said it. It was reckless, nearer to confession than sense. She watched his face to see whether anything in him answered.
That is a subject.
Mr. Blackwood said slowly.
Most writers would rather keep out of a critic's hands.
And yet a critic might argue that reputation tells only part of the story.
A critic may argue anything, I suppose. That is the privilege of never having to write the story himself.
Perhaps,
she said, and opened her book. Mr. Blackwood stayed in his chair. He sat quietly, watching the fire, and once or twice he turned his head toward her as though about to speak. He did not speak. He could not have known what had changed. But her silence had a different weight now, and Mr. Blackwood seemed to feel it. Ellen, crossing the room with her workbag in hand, glanced at them both, the poet watching the fire and the critic pretending to read. She said nothing, but she paused at the door just long enough to give Cassandra one calm, knowing look before she went on. Cassandra had kept Mr. Blackwood's secret for less than a day. Already it had begun keeping her. Chapter 8. The Altered Ground. The morning after her discovery, Cassandra came down to breakfast and found Mr. Blackwood already at the table, buttering toast with the untroubled air of a man who had slept perfectly well. He wore a waistcoat of burnished gold. A week ago she would have noted it as further evidence of his fondness for display. Now she looked at it and thought, armour. Bright, well cut, and perfectly chosen.
Good morning, Miss Fenwick.
Good morning, Mr. Blackwood.
Cassandra took her seat and poured her tea. She did not look at the vivid waistcoat again, though she was aware of it as a small, steady brightness at the edge of her attention. Mrs. Ashworth had proposed a walk, weather permitting, and the rain had at last relented. The sky was a pale, scrubbed blue, and the party set out along the gravel path toward the lake. Mr. Blackwood fell into step beside Cassandra. This was no longer surprising. Cassandra had even ceased pretending that it was.
You look as though you and sleep have quarrelled,
he said.
I slept perfectly well.
Then you look as though you slept perfectly well and disapprove of yourself for the indulgence.
She almost laughed. She caught it, held it behind her teeth, and turned it into something more controlled.
You are very observant for so early in the day.
I am always observant. You are usually more careful about what you permit me to notice.
They walked on. The path narrowed where it passed between two stands of birch, and for a few steps they were close enough that Cassandra caught the clean scent of soap and damp wool. Then she noticed the faint mark of ink at his cuff and thought of the upstairs room, the manuscript, and the pages she had no right to read. She had not known, until that moment, that so small a thing could feel like an accusation. He was speaking of the landscape, of the light on the lake and the trees along the far bank, and Cassandra found herself listening less to what he said than to how carefully he said it. His descriptions had a precision his conversation did not always allow. He did not say the lake was beautiful. He said the light on the water had a quality like tarnished silver, and that the trees on the far bank looked as though someone had arranged their shapes beautifully and neglected their colours. A week ago she would have heard this as performance. Now she heard the storyteller beneath the poet, observing the world with the restless attention of a man who would carry it upstairs and write it down.
You notice a great deal,
she said, and immediately wished she could retrieve the sentence, because it was too close to what she meant.
Not always an advantage, according to some critics.
Not according to all of them.
He looked at her. It was a longer look than the conversation warranted, and Cassandra held it for a moment before turning her attention to the path. Her heart was doing something inconvenient.
You have changed your mind about something. I cannot tell what.
I have not changed my mind. I am only allowing for the possibility that I was not entirely right.
A rare and alarming development.
About the landscape,
she said, and walked on ahead before he could question her any further. That afternoon, while Mr. Blackwood played chess, with Mr. Jessop and Lady Margrave offered commentary, neither player had requested, Cassandra went upstairs and found Ellen in her room, sorting through a small stack of letters. Ellen looked up when Cassandra entered, took one look at her face, and set down her letters.
Sit down, Cassandra,
she said. Cassandra sat on the edge of the bed. She folded her hands. She unfolded them. She picked up a spool of thread from Ellen's work basket, turned it over, and set it down again.
I have done something,
she said.
Yes, I can see that.
I read Mr. Blackwood's private papers.
Ellen's expression did not change, though her hand paused over the letter she had been folding.
His letters?
His manuscript. He has been writing a novel, Ellen. A Gothic novel. I found it in the upstairs study and I read a great deal of it before I could stop myself.
Could you not make yourself put it down?
Evidently not.
Ellen folded the top letter slowly, aligning the edges with unnecessary care.
And was it dreadful?
No,
Cassandra pressed her hands together in her lap.
it was good. Better than good. His poetry is exactly what I said it was, polished in places, fashionable and hollow. But the novel is alive, Ellen. It has a woman in it who catalogues everything she sees because she believes that understanding a thing means she cannot be harmed by it, and the house keeps proving her wrong. The writing moves as it ought to move when the writer has stopped worrying what people will think of him.
She stopped. She was aware that she had said more than she intended, and that Ellen was watching her with the particular stillness that meant she was listening very carefully.
You admire him.
Ellen said.
I admire the writing.
You admire the writer.
Cassandra did not answer immediately.
When I reviewed his poetry for the Lantern under the name Atticus, I wrote that there was a sensibility beneath the posturing, but not, on that evidence, in verse. I was proud of it. I thought it was true.
And now?
And now I know that the most truthful work I have seen from him is hidden away because he cannot claim it openly. I judged him by the work he shows the world, not the work he hides. The review is not wrong. The poetry is shallow. But I wrote it as though the poetry told me more about the man than it did.
Ellen set down her letters. She looked at Cassandra steadily.
You could not have known what he had kept so carefully to himself.
No, but I could have remembered that I did not know everything. I judged the work before me, and I judged it fairly enough, but I mistook it for more than it was. I was too certain. Worse, I enjoyed being certain.
Cassandra.
I am not asking you to comfort me. I am asking you to tell me whether I ought to tell him.
Ellen considered this for a long moment. Outside, someone crossed the gravel. Mr. Ashworth, perhaps, pursuing one of his leisurely investigations of the grounds.
Tell him which part?
Ellen said quietly.
That you read his manuscript. That you are Atticus. That you are sorry. Those are 3 different confessions, Cassandra, and I am not sure you are ready to make even one of them.
For once, Cassandra found no immediate answer.
No, I am not.
Then do not tell him yet, but stop punishing yourself for an honest review. And stop pretending this is only guilt.
Cassandra looked up.
What do you mean?
Ellen picked up her letters.
I mean that guilt does not usually make a person blush at breakfast.
After dinner, the gentlemen rejoined the ladies in the drawing-room. Mr. Ashworth came in last, moving with the peaceful dignity of a man who had done his duty by the port and expected no further exertions. Mrs. Ashworth, declaring that the room had grown too warm, opened the doors to the terrace. The evening was mild, and the party drifted outside in 2s and 3s to take the air. Cassandra stood at the far end of the terrace, where the lamplight from the drawing-room thinned to a glow, her hands resting lightly on the stone balustrade. The garden lay before her, darkening by degrees, and she saw none of it. She was thinking about sentences. Specifically, she was thinking about the sentence she had written. One hopes Mr. Blackwood will find his subject, and the sentence she could not write. He already has. Mr. Blackwood appeared beside her. He moved quietly for a man who dressed so loudly, and Cassandra did not hear him until he spoke.
You have chosen the darkest corner of the terrace.
I am standing in the dusk. There is a difference.
Dusk is only darkness with better manners.
She turned to face him. In the half-light, his features were less definite. The sharp edges softened, and she could see the tiredness beneath his ease. He had been writing today, she was almost certain of it. There was a slight abstraction in his manner, as though he had come downstairs before fully leaving the page behind.
I have been thinking,
he said.
A brave undertaking.
About what you said last night concerning reputation and truth.
Cassandra felt her heart give a hard little beat.
I said less than you seem to have heard.
You said enough to trouble me.
He looked down at the glass in his hands, turning it once before he spoke.
I have been thinking how easily a man may be misread, not merely judged vain or careless or foolish. Those are common enough mistakes. I mean the kind that comes from seeing what a man has chosen to show and deciding it is all there is.
Cassandra said nothing. She could not have spoken if she had wished to. Every word seemed to apply to him, and yet each one found its answer in her own guilt.
I have given people very little reason to see past the surface.
He continued.
I am aware of that. A man who dresses brightly, talks too readily, and publishes the sort of verse I publish is inviting a certain kind of reading, and he cannot fairly complain when others judge him accordingly.
He paused.
But there are moments, and they have come more often this week than I am accustomed to, when I wish the verdict were not delivered quite so quickly.
Cassandra felt something shift between them, as definite as a key turning in a lock. He was telling her something. Not everything. He was a man who kept his secrets, and she of all people understood why. But he was offering her something, and waiting to see whether she would step toward it. She could tell him. The thought struck hard. A tightness in her throat, a heat behind her eyes. She could tell him she had read his manuscript and that it was extraordinary. She could tell him she was Atticus and that the review had been fair but incomplete. She could tell him that she understood now why a person might keep the truest part of themselves hidden even from those who had begun to matter. She opened her mouth.
Mr. Blackwood.
He did not interrupt her. That was worse. He only looked at her, quietly waiting, and the patience in his face made the confession suddenly impossible. Then Mr. Jessop's voice carried across the terrace, asking whether anyone had seen the port. The moment broke. Mr. Blackwood straightened, and the ease returned to him like a coat shrugged back onto the shoulders. It fit him well, but Cassandra could see now that it was not the whole of him.
I should go and rescue the port before Freddie mistakes the decanter for a glass. Good evening, Miss Fenwick.
Good evening, Mr. Blackwood.
He went inside. Cassandra stayed on the terrace. The dusk had deepened while they spoke, and the garden was dark now. The roses invisible, the stone balustrade a pale line against the black. Ellen found her there some time later and said nothing. She simply stood beside her, looking out at the dark garden, until Cassandra said, very quietly,
I think I am in some trouble.
Yes,
Ellen said.
I know.
Chapter 9. The Unmasking. It happened because of Philippa, not through carelessness. Philippa was seldom careless, and never with things that mattered. But she was tired, and she was worried, and she had spent 10 days watching 2 people she cared for move toward a reckoning she had helped to arrange. When the moment came, her guard was down. It was after breakfast. Philippa was in her study, answering correspondence, when Mr. Blackwood knocked and entered. He had a question about a book he wished to borrow, something from the upper shelves, and Philippa rose to help him find it. And then, as he turned to leave, he said, almost as an afterthought,
I have been meaning to ask about the current issue of The Lantern, the review of Selwyn's collection. That was Atticus, was it not?
Yes, it was.
Atticus writes for you regularly.
He does.
He is very good. Confound him.
Mr. Blackwood held the book loosely in one hand. His tone was conversational, nothing more.
I have wondered more than once whether you might tell me who he is, not merely from wounded pride. I should simply like to know the name of the person whose judgment I have come to respect, even when it draws blood.
Philippa reached for the answer she had given a dozen times before.
I cannot tell you who she is,
she said. Only after the words were spoken did she hear the fatal slip. Mr. Blackwood went very still.
She?
Mr. Blackwood!
Philippa took one step toward him, already trying to gather the mistake back into silence. The door opened. Cassandra stood on the threshold, a book in one hand, entirely unaware of what she had interrupted.
Philippa, I wondered whether you had seen Ellen's copy of...
Cassandra stopped. Philippa stood beside the desk, one hand on the back of the chair, her face pale.
Cassandra,
she said, and there was such alarm in the single word that Cassandra understood at once she had walked into the middle of something dreadful. Mr. Blackwood stood near the shelves with a book in his hand. All the ease had gone out of him. No one moved. It lasted only a moment, but it was long enough. Mr. Blackwood turned his head and looked from Philippa to Cassandra, and whatever he saw in Cassandra's face answered the question Philippa had not meant to answer. Not surprise. Recognition first, then guilt.
Miss Fenwick.
Philippa saw the understanding arrive in his face. Not all at once, but in stages, like doors opening one after another down a long corridor. She watched him understand the past weeks anew, and she could see the moment each memory struck differently. The arguments about books and criticism, the conversation about Atticus at tea, the way Cassandra had gone still while he read her own words aloud, her careful expression no longer puzzling, but damning. Mr. Blackwood set his borrowed volume down on the nearest table with great care.
I beg your pardon,
he said. Then he left. Cassandra remained in the doorway, very still. Philippa wanted to say her name, to apologize, to undo the last minute by force of will alone. But the words failed her. Cassandra looked at her once. Then she followed him. She found him in the library, standing near the window with his back to the room. His hands were clasped behind him, and there was a stillness in him that felt less like calm than control. He turned when she entered.
You are Atticus,
he said. Cassandra did not pretend to misunderstand him.
Yes.
The words seemed to darken the space between them.
Did you find it amusing to hear me speak of Atticus? To watch me defend myself to the very woman who had already judged me in print?
That is not true.
Then why did you not tell me? Perhaps not at that moment, not in front of the others, but later, when we were alone. In all our conversations, you could not find one moment to say, I am the person who wrote those words about you, and I have sat across from you pretending otherwise.
His voice had not risen. He was speaking quietly, as though anger were a door he was holding shut. Cassandra stood. She could not face him sitting down. It was a small dignity, and perhaps more than she deserved, but she took it.
The review was honest. I will not apologize for it.
I am not asking you to apologize for the review. I want to know how you could listen while I spoke of being judged, and not tell me that the judgment was yours.
Because telling you would have meant revealing that I am Atticus. And Atticus is the only name under which I am heard, the only name under which my judgment is taken seriously. My words carry weight, and I am not dismissed as a woman with opinions she ought not possess. If I tell you who I am, I lose everything I have built.
And so you chose to let me trust you instead?
I did not understand that you had begun to,
she said, and heard how insufficient it sounded.
Then understand this, Miss Fenwick. You knew what stood between us, and I did not. Again and again, you let me speak to you as though Atticus were a stranger.
The secret protects my work, my livelihood, everything I have made for myself.
I would not have told anyone.
His voice faltered, just slightly, on the last word, and he caught it at once.
Whatever else you think of me, you must know that.
I know,
she said quietly.
Then why?
Because I was afraid. And because I judged only what you chose to show the world, and I could not bear to admit how much I had missed. I reviewed your poetry, and I judged it fairly. The verse is what I said it was, but I mistook the poetry for more of you than it was. I have come to know more of you than your poetry showed me, and I saw still more when I read your Gothic novel.
Mr. Blackwood went very still.
The pages I had not given you leave to read.
You left them on the desk in the upstairs study,
she said, and heard at once how weak it sounded.
I tried not to read them.
And yet you did.
She looked down.
Yes.
Something moved across his face. Not anger this time, but something rawer. She had seen too much of him, and he knew it.
I should have told you, and I am sorry, not for the review, not for protecting Atticus, for not telling you that I had read your manuscript.
And what is your critical judgment of my private pages, Miss Fenwick, since we are being honest?
It is the best thing you have written, better than anything you have published, and if you never let it reach the world, you will have wasted the gift your poetry only hints at.
You assume that it has not reached the world.
Cassandra went still.
What?
You have read my private pages, Miss Fenwick. You have not read everything.
He looked away then, as though even that small admission had cost him more than he had meant to give.
Thank you for your honesty. It comes rather late, but I suppose that is better than never.
He left. The door closed quietly behind him. Cassandra stood alone in the library, surrounded by books that stopped at N, and breathed slowly until she did not cry, though it was a very near thing. At dinner that evening, Mr. Blackwood sat beside Lady Margrave and was charming, excessively charming. He told stories, laughed at Mr. Jessop's jokes, complimented the soup, and spoke with such polished ease that anyone inattentive might have thought nothing was wrong. Then the conversation turned to a new novel Mr. Blackwood had borrowed from Mrs. Ashworth's shelves.
It is cleverer than its detractors would expect. There are readers who see a ruined tower and a threatened inheritance and decide at once that they are above the whole affair.
Mr. Jessop brightened.
I like a ruined tower. As do I, Freddie.
Mr. Blackwood said.
A ruined tower generally knows its business.
There was a little laughter around the table. Then Mr. Blackwood turned, at last, toward Cassandra.
But Miss Fenwick is the proper authority,
he said, with perfect civility.
I should be sorry to praise a book too warmly in the presence of a critic.
The table quieted by half a degree.
I have not read it,
Cassandra said.
No?
His smile did not alter.
Then the author has been spared for one evening.
It was beautifully done. So beautifully done, in fact, that anyone inattentive might have missed the insult entirely. Lady Margrave did not miss it, and neither did Philippa. Beneath the table, Ellen's fingers closed briefly around Cassandra's wrist. Cassandra lowered her eyes to her plate and said nothing. After dinner, the party separated with an awkwardness that no one acknowledged. Mr. Blackwood excused himself early, claiming letters to write. Cassandra went upstairs without waiting for tea. The drawing room, which had been the warm centre of the gathering for nearly a fortnight, felt suddenly too large. Lady Margrave, settling into her chair with the air of a woman who missed nothing and forgave less, looked at the empty seats and then at Mrs. Ashworth.
Something has occurred between Miss Fenwick and Mr. Blackwood,
she said. It was not a question. Mrs. Ashworth set down her teacup.
I could not say.
You could. You are choosing not to.
Lady Margrave adjusted her shawl.
Whatever has passed between them, it has chilled your party very thoroughly, and if it is not mended, the remaining days will be very long indeed.
Mrs. Ashworth said nothing. She picked up her teacup, set it down again, and looked toward the door through which her husband had wandered some minutes before, looking peacefully content and leaving, as ever, a faint suggestion of cheese in his wake. Upstairs, Philippa found Cassandra's door closed and did not knock. She went to her own room, sat at her desk, and began a letter she could not finish. In her room, Ellen sat in the window seat with a book open in her lap and did not go to Cassandra, not because she did not wish to, but because she knew her cousin. Tonight, Cassandra needed to sit with what had happened without anyone trying to make it gentler. Ellen would wait until Cassandra was ready to come to her. And in his room, at the desk where he did not write, Mr. Blackwood sat with the manuscript of his novel open before him and read the passage about the woman who catalogued everything she saw. He read it twice. Then he closed the manuscript, put out his candle, and sat in the dark for a long time. She had told him his hidden work was the best thing he had ever written. In spite of everything, he believed her. Worse, he valued the judgment, because it came from the mind behind Atticus. That was what made it unbearable. He wanted to keep the praise and reject the woman who had given it, but he could not do either cleanly. Chapter 10. The resolution. 2 days passed. They were very long days. Mr. Blackwood did not avoid Cassandra. That would have been too obvious, and Mr. Blackwood was never obvious. He simply arranged matters so they were never alone. At meals, he sat at the far end of the table. In the drawing room, he attached himself to Mr. Jessop or Lady Margrave. He was polite when required. He passed the salt. He did not meet her eyes. Cassandra, for her part, did not seek him out. She could not enter the library without feeling the shape of his absence in the chair beside hers. Mr. Jessup was the first to say anything. On the second evening, Cassandra came down early for dinner and found him alone in the drawing room, standing by the fire with an expression of uncharacteristic thought.
"I say, Miss Fenwick,"
He began, and then stopped, as though the sentence had got ahead of him and he was waiting for it to come back.
Yes, Mr. Jessup?
"Kit is, well, he is not quite himself, is he? Not ill, I don't mean that. He is cheerful enough. Too cheerful, really. That is generally a bad sign with Kit."
Cassandra said nothing.
"The thing is,"
Mr. Jessup continued,
people look at Kit and see the waistcoats and the stories and think that is all there is. I did too, at first. But you do not share a tent with a man for years and come away thinking he is only what he shows at dinner.
A tent?
In Spain, during the war, we shared quarters for years on and off. Kit does not talk about it much. Does not talk about it at all, really, which ought to tell you something.
Mr. Jessup glanced down at his empty glass, as if surprised to find it so.
He is the best man I know, Miss Fenwick. I do not say that lightly. He pulled me out of a ditch outside Talavera when he had every reason to leave me there and sat up with me 3 nights when I had the fever.
He wandered off, leaving Cassandra alone by the fire with the uncomfortable knowledge that Mr. Jessup had told her what she had not known and confirmed what she had begun to suspect. There was far more to Mr. Blackwood than he allowed the world to see. Ellen came to her that night. She did not knock. She simply opened the door, sat on the edge of Cassandra's bed and waited. Cassandra, who was sitting at the small writing desk with a pen in her hand and nothing written on the page before her, did not look up.
You cannot write your way out of this,
Ellen said. Cassandra set down her pen.
I do not know what to say to him.
Yes, you do. You are afraid it will not be enough.
Cassandra looked at her. Ellen's face was calm, steady, entirely without judgment, and Cassandra felt something loosen in her chest that had been held tight for 2 days.
And what if it is not enough?
Then it is not enough, and you will bear it. But you will have told him the truth, and that matters more than finding words fine enough to make him forgive you.
That was very like Ellen, kind, accurate, and impossible to escape. Lady Margrave, meanwhile, had not been idle. She cornered Cassandra the following morning in the breakfast room with the directness of a woman who had very little patience for tact when plain speaking would do.
Miss Fenwick, you and Mr. Blackwood have made this party intolerable, and I should like it to stop.
Lady Margrave, I assure you, there is nothing requiring your concern.
There is everything requiring my concern. I am old enough to recognize a quarrel between 2 people who are too proud to mend it, and I have no patience for it. You are miserable. He is miserable. The rest of us are being forced to dine with the weather between you.
Cassandra opened her mouth. Lady Margrave lifted one hand.
No. Go and talk to the man. Whatever you said, did, failed to say, or failed to do, it cannot possibly be worse than another evening like last night.
She picked up her toast.
Pride is a very poor breakfast companion, Miss Fenwick. I speak from long experience.
Cassandra found him in the garden. Not the formal garden, where one might be observed from the house, but the walled garden at the far end of the grounds, where Philippa grew herbs and the gardener kept his tools, and no one went to unless they wished to be alone. He was sitting on the stone bench beneath the pear tree, not reading, not writing, not performing, merely sitting. The quiet of him was so unlike his usual animation that Cassandra almost lost her courage. But she went on.
Mr. Blackwood.
He looked up. For one unguarded moment, hope crossed his face before he suppressed it, and the sight undid her more than coldness would have done.
Miss Fenwick.
May I join you?
He moved to make room on the bench. She sat. The pear tree scattered leaf shadow across the gravel, and somewhere beyond the wall a bird was singing with the oblivious persistence of a creature that had no interest in human drama.
I have come to say something, and I would ask you to let me finish before you reply.
He inclined his head. She noticed his hands were very still in his lap.
My review of your poetry was honest, and I will not take it back. The verse deserved what I wrote. You know that as well as I do.
Something moved in his jaw, but he said nothing.
But I made an error that no good critic should make. I looked at the work before me and decided it told me everything I needed to know about the man who had written it. I saw the polished surface and stopped there. I did not consider that the surface might be a choice, that you might be showing the world one thing and keeping something truer hidden. That was not a failure of my criticism. It was a failure of my imagination.
She paused. Her hands were pressed together in her lap, and she could feel the rapid beat of her pulse against her own fingers.
When I first met you, I expected to dislike you. I expected a vain man who dressed too brightly and cared too much about his own reputation. But you are also the man who is loyal to his friends, who hides kindness behind laughter, and who writes with more honesty than he allows himself to show in company. I should have remembered that a man may be more than the face he presents to the world.
She looked at him. He was watching her with careful attention, listening as though every word mattered, and he had not yet decided whether any of them could be trusted.
I am sorry for the assumption, for reading your Gothic novel manuscript without permission, and most of all, for saying nothing once I had done so.
Mr. Blackwood did not speak for a long moment. The bird beyond the wall had stopped singing. The garden was very quiet.
The poetry deserved what it got,
He said at last. His voice was rough at the edges, as though the words had cost him something on the way out.
I have known that for longer than I care to admit. The verse was what I thought a man like me ought to write. I wrote it because it was safe.
He looked down at his hands.
The novels are what I actually care about. The stories, the houses, the secrets, the fear people will not name. That is where I feel most alive as a writer. But a former officer does not put his name to Gothic novels. Not if he wishes to keep his place in the world. So I gave the world the poetry instead, and told myself the performance was enough.
It was not enough,
Cassandra said quietly.
No, it was not. And when your review said I had not found my subject, I was furious because you were right. I had found it, but not in the work I dared to put my name to. The poetry had nothing to say because I had put everything that mattered into the novels and given the world an empty frame.
He paused.
You saw the emptiness. That is what I could not forgive. Not the severity of the judgment, but the accuracy of it.
I did not see through you. That is precisely my point. When I wrote the review, I judged the verse before me, and I do not think I was wrong. But here in this house, I came to know more of you than your poetry showed me. Then I read your Gothic novel and saw more still.
I should have told you. I did not.
He was silent for a moment.
Yes,
He said at last.
You were right about the poetry. I know that. But here, in this house, you were not only a critic, and I was not only a book under review.
They sat for a moment in the quiet of the walled garden. The shadow of the pear tree had shifted, and the light fell differently on the bench. Cassandra was aware that something had changed between them that could not be changed back.
You said something in the library,
She began.
that I should not assume your Gothic writing had never reached the world.
Mr. Blackwood looked at her. A faint colour rose along his jaw.
I publish under a pseudonym. It appears we have both been making use of borrowed names.
What name did you give yourself?
For a moment he looked down, embarrassed by the old concealment even now. Then he said it.
Our Bellamy Vale. The novel is called The Phantom of Ravelsmoor.
Cassandra stared at him.
I reviewed that novel.
Mr. Blackwood looked at her sharply.
As Atticus?
No, before Atticus. It was one of my first reviews for The Lantern. I wrote it under no name at all.
He drew in a slow breath.
That anonymous review in The Lantern was yours.
Yes.
The silence that followed was extraordinary.
I remember it.
I should hope so. It was very favourable. I wrote that beneath the machinery of the Gothic, there was a real understanding of fear and self-deception. I said the writing had a restless life, and that the author possessed more seriousness than his chosen form would lead careless readers to expect.
Mr. Blackwood stared at her. Then, for the first time in 2 days, he laughed. It was not the polished laugh he used in company, the one that invited others to join. It was startled and genuine and slightly helpless, and Cassandra, who had not expected even to smile in his presence again, found herself laughing too.
Good God! I hardly know whether to thank you or resent the irony.
Under the circumstances, I believe the irony has behaved very badly.
He shook his head slowly, smiling now.
You are a very dangerous woman, Miss Fenwick.
Only in print, I hope.
No, not only there.
They walked slowly back to the house. The gravel path wound through the lower garden, past the rose beds where the first blooms hung heavy after the rain. They walked side by side without speaking for a time, letting all that had been said settle between them.
You understand that nothing about this is simple. I am Atticus. If that becomes known, I lose the only voice I have. And you are R. Bellamy Vale. If that becomes known, society will laugh, and the work you care about most will be judged by the name attached to it, not by the pages themselves. We are two people hiding behind chosen names, and each of us mistook the other's disguise for the whole truth.
When you put it that way, it sounds almost like a novel.
A Gothic novel, perhaps, with a house that knows more than its inhabitants.
That would explain the noise on the stairs last night. I had assumed it was Mr. Ashworth in search of something to eat.
He smiled. It was not the performance smile, not the one calibrated for an audience. It was quieter, less certain, and it did something to Cassandra's composure that she chose not to examine too closely.
Miss Fenwick!
Mr. Blackwood.
He looked at her carefully.
After all this talk of invented names, it seems rather absurd that we should cling so fiercely to the formal ones.
That depends. Do you mean to abandon yours first?
Kit.
She looked at him. The afternoon light was warm on his face, and he was watching her with the expression of a man who had risked the question before he was certain he could bear the answer.
Cassandra.
After everything, their names were the one honest thing neither of them could hide behind. They went inside. In the drawing room, the party looked up. Freddie took one glance at Kit's face and grinned as though someone had just promised him a second pudding. Ellen, in her chair by the window, closed her book with quiet relief. Lady Margrave looked from one to the other with the sharp satisfaction of a woman who had been right and saw no reason to be modest about it. Philippa poured 2 cups of tea without being asked and set them on the table with quiet precision. Mr. Ashworth, who had been dozing in his chair, opened one eye, surveyed the room, and closed it again, content. Philippa said nothing, but when Cassandra looked at her, she gave a small, uncertain smile, full of all the apology she could not yet speak. Cassandra nodded once. For now, it was enough. Not an ending, perhaps, but the first honest page of what came next. Epilogue. 1 year later. The second edition of The Phantom of Ravelsmoor arrived on a Tuesday morning, wrapped in brown paper and string, and Cassandra set it on the breakfast table beside the marmalade and waited for her husband to come downstairs. He appeared in a beautifully cut coat of deep green, which was restrained by his standards and almost sober by ordinary ones. She had grown fond of his extravagant taste in clothes, though she would not have admitted it under oath.
It has arrived,
she said. Kit picked up the volume and turned it over in his hands. The spine read R. Bellamy Vale, as the first edition had. But beneath the title, in smaller type, a new line had been added, with an introduction by C. Blackwood. He looked at her.
You used your own name?
I did.
Not Atticus?
No, not Atticus.
He opened the book to the introduction and read the first line aloud. She had written it a month ago, sitting at the desk in the study they now shared, and hearing it in his voice made the words feel strange, familiar, and somehow more real.
It is very good.
It is accurate, which is more important.
It is both. Only you could make a compliment sound as though it had been properly argued.
You married me because I was the only woman in England who had reviewed you both savagely and favourably, and meant it equally both times.
I cannot deny the evidence.
He set the book down, poured his coffee, and sat across from her at the small table by the window. Outside, the street was bright with early autumn light, and the sound of a cart passing over cobblestones came faintly through the glass. It was a modest house, near enough to Philippa's offices that Cassandra could walk to the Lantern on fine days, and near enough to Kit's publisher that he could deliver manuscripts in person and worry about them all the way home. Atticus still wrote for the Lantern. The reviews were as precise as ever, though Philippa had observed, with the careful neutrality of an editor who knew better than to say so directly, that Atticus had grown half a degree more generous in his judgments. Cassandra denied this. The evidence was not entirely in her favour. Kit was writing another novel. He wrote in the mornings, in the study upstairs, and Cassandra had learned to read his progress by the state of his cuffs. Clean cuffs meant thinking. Ink-stained cuffs meant the work was going well. No ink at all meant he had spent the morning staring at the wall and would need walking before dinner. Today, his cuffs were still immaculate. Cassandra hoped, for both their sakes, that they would not remain so.
Philippa writes that she has had a letter from Lady Margrave,
Cassandra said, setting down the post.
She wishes to know whether we intend to come to Lacey Court this autumn.
And do we?
I believe we must. Freddie has already accepted on our behalf.
Kit looked unsurprised. Freddie dined with them whenever he could persuade himself that he had not already imposed too often, which was frequently, and had acquired a dangerous confidence in speaking for the household.
He told Philippa that if the same cook is still in residence, refusal would be an offence against civilization.
Freddie is not wrong about the cook.
Freddie is not wrong about a surprising number of things.
Kit smiled. It was the quiet smile, the one she had first seen in the walled garden beneath the pear tree. She returned it easily now.
I should tell you that I have written a critic into the new novel. She is brilliant and terrifying and always right, and I am a little in love with her.
Only a little.
One must maintain some professional distance.
From your own character?
From my wife when she's being smug at breakfast.
Take care. There will be other books, and I am not above revenge in print.
Cassandra laughed. It still surprised her sometimes, how easily laughter came now, unguarded and without apology. She had married a man who wrote Gothic novels, dressed as though colour were a moral duty, and had the good sense to love a woman who was learning, at last, that truth did not always need armour. She picked up her pen. She had a review to finish. Kit took his coffee upstairs. The house settled around them with the quiet contentment of a place that held two writers, a great many books, and no secrets between them. The end. And so, a small house in London is left with tea growing cold, ink on the cuffs, and no secrets at all. If you enjoyed this tale of sharp words and hidden hearts, another journey awaits. Listen to The Reluctant Escort, a full Regency romance audiobook, where a young woman with her reputation in ruins and a former officer who keeps the world at arm's length are thrown together on the winter road from Dover to Florence. Neither of them is looking for love, but 6 weeks of frozen gardens, mountain passes, and Tuscan sunlight may change their minds. Tap the video on your screen to continue listening. I shall return soon with another romance, unless I've been detained by weather, poor roads, and unexpectedly good company.